I picked up the phone and called my attorney before my coffee even got cold. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted revenge, because my son, the child I raised alone, the boy I sacrificed everything for, had just left a note on my kitchen table telling me I was a burden. And for the first time in 68 years, I decided to believe him. By noon, his name was gone from my will, the accounts, the property, all of it. But here's the part nobody saw coming. What he thought would push me away was actually the moment I finally found myself. If you're watching this from Chicago, from Dallas, from a quiet town in the Carolinas, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if nobody's told you today that your story matters, I'm telling you now. Subscribe, because this one is for all of us who gave everything and almost forgot to keep something for ourselves. I didn't sleep well the night before. That's the thing, nobody tells you about getting older. Sleep becomes this unreliable stranger that shows up when it wants to and leaves without saying goodbye. I'd been lying awake since around 3 in the morning, listening to the house settle around me, listening to the refrigerator hum in the kitchen, listening to absolutely nothing, and somehow still not being able to close my eyes. By 6:15, I gave up. I put on my robe, the old navy blue one with the frayed pocket that I keep telling myself I'll replace and never do, and I padded down the hallway toward the kitchen. The floors were cold. October had come in fast that year, faster than usual, and the old house hadn't caught up yet. I remember thinking I needed to call someone about the heating. I remember thinking I should check whether Daniel had already put in the order for the furnace inspection, like he said he would back in August. I was already thinking about what Daniel needed, even at 6 in the morning, even before I'd made my coffee. That was the pattern of my life, and I hadn't even noticed how deep it ran until that morning cracked it open. The kitchen was dim. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I never do first thing. There's a small lamp on the counter near the window that casts just enough yellow light to navigate by, and that's always been enough for me. I filled the kettle. I set it on the burner. I reached for my coffee mug, the white one with the small chip on the handle that I've had for 11 years, and that's when I saw it. A folded piece of paper sitting on the kitchen table, right in the center, placed there deliberately. My name wasn't on it. There was no envelope, just a single sheet of white paper folded in half sitting where my placemat usually was. I remember standing there for a moment, with my hands still wrapped around my coffee mug, just staring at it. Something moved through me right then, not quite dread, not quite knowing, but something. A shift. The way the air changes before a storm, even though the sky still looks clear. I set the mug down. I picked up the paper. I unfolded it, and I read 7 words that rearranged everything I thought I understood about my life. "Mom, you need to stop depending on me." That was the first sentence. I read the whole note. It wasn't long, maybe 4 or 5 sentences total, but my eyes kept going back to that first line, reading it again, reading it a 3rd time, a 4th time, as if repetition might eventually produce a different meaning, as if somehow with enough passes, those words would rearrange themselves into something gentler. They didn't. "Mom, you need to stop depending on me. I have my own family now. You need to make your own plans." I stood in my kitchen in my frayed robe with the cold floor seeping through my socks, and I held my son's handwriting in my hands, and I felt something I had never felt before in all my 68 years. I felt like a fool, not because I was angry, not yet, because my first instinct, my very first automatic bone-deep instinct, was to think about what I had done wrong. My mind went immediately to, what did I miss? What did I do? How do I fix this? Even holding a note that was by any reasonable measure unkind, even holding proof that my child had left a grievance on paper rather than saying it to my face, my first move was to turn it inward and find my own fault. That's how deep it was. That's how thoroughly I had trained myself to absorb everything, carry everything, and make myself responsible for everyone else's feelings. I folded the note. I placed it beside my coffee cup. And then I stood very still for what felt like a long time, though it was probably less than a minute. The kettle started to whistle. I turned off the burner. I made my coffee. And I sat down at my kitchen table, and I thought about my life. My name is Evelyn Harper. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years working as a hospital administrator, working my way up from a scheduling coordinator in my late 20s to the director of operations for a mid-size regional hospital in western North Carolina, a position I held for 14 years before I retired. I am a widow. I lost my husband Robert to a sudden cardiac event when Daniel was 19 years old, barely an adult, barely past the age where a boy still needs his father in ways he doesn't have language for yet. I raised Daniel mostly alone. Robert was a good man and a loving father for the 19 years he was with us, but after he was gone, it was me. Just me. I went to work every morning and came home every evening and made sure Daniel had what he needed. I attended every college visit by myself. I sat alone at his graduation. I helped him move into his first apartment, and I drove home and I cried in the parking lot of a grocery store for 20 minutes, and then I pulled myself together and I kept going. That's what I did. I kept going. I want to be very clear about something before I tell you the rest of this story. I am not a saint. I have never claimed to be. I made mistakes as a mother. I was overprotective at times and probably let Daniel avoid certain realities for longer than I should have. I worked long hours when he was in middle school, and there are years I look back on and wish I had been more present. I am not telling this story to make myself into some kind of hero. But I loved that boy. I loved him the way you love something you built with your whole body and then watched walk away from you over and over for the next 50 years, hoping each time that he'd look back. I loved him imperfectly and completely and without condition. And I genuinely believed that he understood that, until I read that note. You need context to understand how we got here. You can't drop into the middle of a story and understand the weight of it without knowing the years that came before. So let me take you back. Let me take you back 7 years to a November afternoon when Daniel called me from his car and his voice was tight and careful, the way it gets when he's trying not to panic. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something." "Okay." I was in my office. I remember I was reviewing quarterly budgets. "What's going on?" "Rachel and I were in a little bit of a tight spot right now." I put the budget documents down. "What kind of tight spot?" A pause. "The mortgage. We stretched too much, I think. We knew it was aggressive when we bought, but the rate adjusted and now the payment it's a lot more than we planned for." "How much more?" He told me the number. I was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you behind on payments?" "Not yet, but we will be. Within 2 months probably if something doesn't change." I heard Rachel's voice in the background, quiet and tense. I couldn't make out the words. "Daniel." I kept my voice steady. "What are you asking me?" Another pause. Longer this time. "We don't know what to do, Mom." That was his way. That was always his way. He would lay the problem at my feet without quite asking me to solve it, because that way when I solved it, it felt like my idea. I recognized it even then. I recognized it, and I loved him anyway, and I said, "Let me think about something. I'll call you back tonight." I called him back at 7 that evening. "I have a proposal," I told him. "I want you to listen to the whole thing before you respond." "Okay. You know my house. You know the layout. There's the main house, and there's the guest apartment on the east side, the one your Aunt Margaret used to stay in when she visited. 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, its own entrance." "Mom, let me finish." I waited. "I'm proposing that you and Rachel move into the main house, temporarily, while you get your finances stabilized. I'll move into the guest apartment. I don't need all that space anyway. I never did, it's just me. You'll have a roof over your heads without a crippling mortgage payment. You save aggressively. You get ahead of your debt. And when you're ready, when you're actually stable, you move on." Silence. "Daniel, say something." "Mom." His voice broke a little, just at the edges. "You don't have to do this." "I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to. There's a difference. Do you understand the difference?" "Yes." "This isn't charity. This is a bridge. You walk across it, and then you keep going. That's the agreement." "Yes, absolutely. Mom, I thank you. I don't know how to—" "Don't thank me with words. Thank me by actually doing what you're going to tell me you'll do." He laughed a little. "Okay, yes, we will." Rachel got on the phone. I remember her voice was thick with tears. "Evelyn, you have no idea what this means to us. You have no idea. You are the most generous, most incredible. I don't even have the words." "Rachel." I kept my voice warm but level. "Take good care of my house." Of course we will. I promise." I hung up the phone and sat in the quiet of my office for a while. I told myself I was doing the right thing. I was. But I underestimated how much the right thing can still go wrong. They moved in on a Saturday in January. There was a light snow falling, not heavy, just that fine, sugary kind that dusts everything but doesn't stick. Daniel backed the moving truck up the driveway, and he and 2 of his friends spent most of the day hauling boxes and furniture while Rachel organized and directed. I helped where I could. I made lunch for everyone. I felt good about it. I felt warm in the way you feel warm when you believe you are actively participating in love. The first few months were genuinely fine. More than fine, actually. Having them in the house brought noise back into a place that had been quiet for a long time. I heard their television in the evenings. I heard Rachel laughing on the phone. I heard Daniel mowing the lawn on Saturday mornings, taking it upon himself without being asked, which meant more to me than I knew how to say. He cooked dinner for me twice that first month and brought it over to the apartment. Just knocked on my door with a covered dish and said, "Made too much pasta. Thought you might want some." I ate it at my little kitchen table and I thought, he's going to be okay. They both are. We're going to be okay. I want you to hold on to that image of me, sitting at my small table, eating pasta my son brought me, thinking everything was going to be all right. Hold on to it because it's the last truly uncomplicated moment I can point to. Somewhere around month 4 or 5, small things started shifting. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of slow erosion that you don't notice because each individual change is so minor that you tell yourself you're being oversensitive, paranoid, too attached. Daniel stopped mowing the lawn as reliably, then stopped mowing it at all. I mentioned it once gently. He said he'd been swamped at work. He'd get to it. He didn't. I eventually hired someone. Rachel began having her friends over more regularly, which was fine. It was her home too, that was the arrangement. But she stopped mentioning it to me in advance. I'd come out of my apartment on a Wednesday afternoon to get my mail and find 3 strange cars in my driveway and laughter coming from my back patio. I'd stand at my mailbox and feel like a visitor at my own address. I told myself, they need their space. They need to feel like it's their home. Be gracious. I was gracious. Then month 6 turned into month 8, and month 8 turned into the first full year, and I began quietly paying for things I hadn't originally agreed to cover. The electric bill ran higher than expected. Daniel mentioned it offhand, and I said I'd handle it just until they caught up. The water heater failed. I paid for the replacement because it was my house and it seemed unfair to ask them to absorb it. Then Daniel's car needed new tires, not directly my problem. He didn't ask directly, but he mentioned it in a way that landed, and I found myself 3 days later handing him a check. Each time I told myself, this is a bridge, you're helping them across, but bridges have 2 ends, and I was starting to wonder if they'd forgotten where the other side was. The night I remember most clearly, the night that should have told me what I was dealing with, happened on a Friday in late spring, about 14 months into the arrangement. I'd had a long day. Even in retirement, I kept busy, and that particular day, I'd been at the hospital doing volunteer work. I still consulted there informally, sometimes just a few hours a week, because that place had been my life for 30 years, and I wasn't ready to let it go entirely. I came home tired. I wanted a quiet evening. I wanted to heat up some soup, watch something mindless on television, and go to bed at 9. I unlocked my apartment door and heard music. Not from the main house, from my apartment. I stood in the doorway for a moment, confused. Then I stepped inside and followed the sound to the back bedroom, the room I used as a sitting room with the good reading chair and the bookshelf, and Robert's old photograph on the desk. The furniture had been moved, not dramatically, not ransacked, just shifted. The reading chair was pushed to the left. The small side table was against the wall instead of beside the chair. And sitting in the center of the room, plugged into my outlet, was a portable Bluetooth speaker that very definitely did not belong to me, playing something with a lot of bass at a volume that bounced off the walls. Rachel was in the room. She didn't hear me come in, or if she did, she didn't react. She was on her phone, talking, leaning against the windowsill that looked into the backyard. She was talking to someone about redecoration. I caught fragments. Too much dark wood, if you ask me. No, that whole corner could be. I stood in the doorway of my own sitting room. She noticed me. She held up one finger, "Give me a second," and finished her sentence on the phone. Then she looked up at me with an expression that was friendly, but not apologetic. Not at all apologetic. "Hey, Evelyn, hope you don't mind, my Bluetooth speaker died in the main house and I needed to charge it. I thought I'd tidy up in here a little while I was at it." I looked at my reading chair, at Robert's photograph, which had been moved 6 inches to the right, at the furniture that wasn't where I'd put it. "Rachel." I kept my voice level. I was good at keeping my voice level. 30 years of hospital administration will teach you that. "This is my apartment." She blinked. A brief flicker of something. Then the friendly expression came back. "Of course, yes, I know. I got a little carried away, I guess." She picked up her speaker. "I'll put everything back." Please." She put things mostly back. Close enough. And she left without another word, the way someone leaves a room when they don't believe they've done anything wrong. I sat down in my reading chair. I looked at Robert's photograph, and for the first time very quietly, in a part of myself, I'd been ignoring a small voice said, "Evelyn, pay attention." I paid attention. Once you start paying attention, really paying attention, the uncomfortable kind where you stop explaining things away, you start seeing patterns you should have recognized months earlier. I noticed that Rachel had begun referring to the house differently, not as Evelyn's house or even just the house. She started calling it our place. I heard her on a phone call with her sister. "Our place has a great kitchen for entertaining, you should come visit." I noticed that Daniel, when he spoke to me about finances, had shifted from a tone of gratitude to a tone of expectation. The updates were less "we're making progress" and more "we're going to need a little more time." And one afternoon, an ordinary Thursday, nothing special, I was coming back from a walk. I passed the kitchen window of the main house and heard Rachel's voice through the screen. She was talking to a friend who was over for coffee. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I wasn't hiding. I was just walking past my own window and I heard my name. Or not my name, something worse. She pointed. I saw her hand gesture through the glass toward the east side of the house, toward my apartment. And she said in a voice that was casual and comfortable and completely without malice, which somehow made it so much worse, "Eventually she won't need all this space anymore." I stopped walking. The friend said something I couldn't hear. Rachel laughed lightly. "I know, right? But for now it works." I stood on my own lawn in the October afternoon, next to the rose bush I had planted with my own hands the year after Robert died, and I understood something with a terrible clarity. They had plans for this house, plans that did not include me. They were not waiting for a bridge to the other side. They were waiting for me to disappear. I did not confront Rachel that day. I want to tell you I swept inside and said everything that needed to be said. But that's not what happened. What happened was that I finished my walk, went back to my apartment, made a cup of tea, and sat very still for a long time. I thought about my own mother. I thought about how she used to say, "Evelyn, you can give people everything, and they will still want the one thing you didn't offer." I thought about Robert, who knew me better than anyone, who used to look at me across a room with this expression. I never quite had words for something like pride, mixed with tenderness, mixed with something worried, and who once told me late at night after a long argument about nothing important, "Ev, you take care of the whole world. Who takes care of you?" I hadn't had a good answer for him then. I still didn't have one, but I was starting to understand the question better. I watched. I waited. I said nothing. For weeks I let things continue as they were while I gathered my own thoughts, the way you gather wood before a storm, quietly, deliberately, without announcing what you're preparing for. Daniel came to see me one evening in early November. He knocked on my apartment door the way he'd started doing, politely, formally, the way you knock on a neighbor's door rather than a parent's. I let him in and offered him coffee, and he sat across from me at the small kitchen table and talked for 20 minutes about his job, about friends of theirs, about a trip he and Rachel were considering. He did not ask about me. He did not ask how I was sleeping, or whether my hip was bothering me the way it had been in September, or whether I needed anything. He sat in my kitchen and talked about his life as if I were an audience for it, rather than a participant in it. When he finally wound down, I said, "Daniel, are you happy with how things are going?" He nodded. "Yeah, actually, really good. Work's been solid. Rachel's happy." "Good," I smiled. "Good." He left around 8:30. I washed the coffee cups and stood at my sink and looked out the window at the backyard. My backyard, the one I'd mowed and weeded and replanted for 22 years, and I let myself feel just for a moment the full weight of what I was carrying. And then I decided I was done carrying it quietly. But the decision didn't happen that night. It happened 2 months later on a cold Tuesday morning when I came into my kitchen in my frayed blue robe and found a folded note in the center of my kitchen table. I've already told you what it said. "Mom, you need to stop depending on me. I have my own family now. You need to make your own plans." But I haven't told you what happened after I read it the 4th time. I haven't told you about the thing that replaced the numbness. I'll tell you now. anger. Not the hot, sputtering kind that says things it regrets. Not the kind that picks up the phone and calls and says terrible things that can't be taken back. Not the kind that breaks dishes or slams doors. The cold kind. The quiet kind. The kind that comes from years of watching someone take and take and take while you kept convincing yourself that giving was the same as loving. The kind that has been building so slowly and for so long that when it finally arrives, it doesn't feel like an explosion. It feels like clarity. I sat at my kitchen table and I drank my coffee, and I read that note one more time, and something inside me that had been very, very patient for a very, very long time simply said enough, not dramatically, not loudly, just enough. I got up. I went to my bedroom. I changed out of my robe and into real clothes slacks, a blouse, my good cardigan. I came back to the kitchen. I picked up the phone, and I called my attorney. Her name is Patricia Mead. I'd worked with her for years. She'd handled my estate planning, my property documentation, Robert's affairs after he passed. She is a precise, no-nonsense woman about 12 years younger than me, who has a way of listening that makes you feel like your words are being recorded and filed rather than simply heard. I've always found that quality enormously comforting. Her assistant answered, and I said, "This is Evelyn Harper. I need to speak with Patricia today. It's a matter of some urgency." I was in Patricia's office by 10:30. I handed her the note. She read it. She didn't react visibly. That was her style. She set it on the desk. "Tell me what you're thinking," she said. "I'm thinking," I said carefully, "that my son has made his position very clear, and I'd like to respond accordingly. Meaning I'd like to begin by reviewing my will, and then I'd like to review every financial arrangement that currently involves Daniel or Rachel." Patricia looked at me over her reading glasses. "Everything. Everything." She was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her pen. "All right," she said. "Let's start at the beginning." We were in that office for nearly 2 hours. Patricia walked me through every document, every account, every arrangement. And as she laid it all out in front of me, the will, the accounts listed in Daniel's name as beneficiary, the vehicle, the financial connections I'd allowed to grow over 7 years, without ever examining their full weight, I felt something shift. Not grief, something closer to recognition. I had built an entire infrastructure of support around my son. I had woven myself into the fabric of his life so thoroughly that I had forgotten where I ended and where he began. And he had let me, and he had leaned into it, and somewhere along the way, he had confused my love for an entitlement. That was the part I couldn't let stand. Not the inconvenience of it, not even the ingratitude, the confusion. Because a love that can be expected is no longer a gift. It's a debt. And I was not willing to spend the rest of my life being someone's debt. "I want Daniel removed as executor," I told Patricia. She wrote it down. "I want to transfer primary beneficiary status on the main accounts." She wrote it down. "And I'd like to address the living arrangement." She looked up. "That's going to be more complicated," she said. "I know. It may take some time." "I know that too. I'm not in a hurry. I'm just finally moving." She nodded once, slowly, and for just a moment, just a fraction of a moment, I thought I saw something in her expression that wasn't professional neutrality, something that looked almost like respect. I drove home in the early afternoon. The sky was that particular shade of pale winter blue that always makes me think of Robert. He loved the sky most in November, which I never entirely understood, but always found beautiful about him. I parked in the driveway of my own house. I sat in the car for a moment. Through the front windows of the main house, I could see movement, Rachel probably moving through the kitchen, living her life, assuming everything would continue as it always had. I picked up the note from the passenger seat. I had carried it with me to Patricia's office without quite deciding to. Now I held it in my lap and read it one more time. "Mom, you need to stop depending on me." I folded it. I put it in the pocket of my cardigan. I got out of the car and walked back to my apartment. I made another cup of coffee. And I sat down at my kitchen table and began to think about my future mine, just mine belonging entirely to me for what I believe was the first real time in my adult life. That night, I slept, deeply, fully, without waking at 3 a.m. with my mind already turning over someone else's problems. I slept like someone who had put something down. And in the morning when I woke up and lay still in the early quiet and waited for the familiar weight of worry to settle back onto my chest, it didn't come. For the first time in I don't know how many years, the morning was just morning. Mine. Just mine. And something small and persistent and real began to grow in the space where the worry used to live. Something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten what to call it. Hope. 2 days later, my son was going to show up at my door. He was going to be angry, and I was going to hand him his own note. But that comes next. 2 days. That's how long it took before Daniel showed up. 2 days of silence from the main house that felt less like quiet and more like a held breath. 2 days of me going about my morning's coffee, my walk, my reading with the strange new lightness of someone who has finally stopped pretending. 2 days of knowing that somewhere on the other side of the wall that separated my apartment from the rest of my own house, my son and his wife were living their lives completely unaware that anything had changed. That was the part that stayed with me. They didn't know yet, and I wasn't going to call them. I wasn't going to knock on the door and say, "We need to talk." I wasn't going to send a message or leave my own note on their table. I had spent years going to them, smoothing things over, initiating the repair, absorbing the discomfort so that no one else had to feel it. Not this time. This time I was going to let the silence do the work. And silence, when you stop being afraid of it, is one of the most powerful things a person can use. The first day after my meeting with Patricia, I woke up and made breakfast and sat at my table and ate it slowly, not rushing, not half-eating while I thought about someone else's needs. I made eggs the way I actually like them, soft with a little too much butter with toast that's borderline burnt because I like the bitterness at the edge. I ate every bite. I drank 2 full cups of coffee. I read 4 chapters of a novel I'd been carrying around half-finished for 3 months because I never seemed to have the space in my head to actually inhabit it. That morning I inhabited it. It sounds so small. I know it sounds small. But when you've spent decades living in the margins of your own life, sitting down and eating eggs the way you like them, and reading 4 chapters without interruption, is not a small thing. It is a revolution. The second day I called my friend Dolores. Dolores had been my friend since we were both young mothers, navigating the particular madness of the 1980s, with small children and too little sleep, and husbands who tried but didn't always know how. We had stayed close through everything, through Robert's death, through her divorce, through the years when we were both absorbed in careers and children and couldn't manage more than a monthly phone call. She was one of the few people in my life who would tell me the truth without softening it into something unrecognizable. She picked up on the second ring. "Evelyn, I was just thinking about you." "Were you? You sound different." "Different how?" A pause. "Quieter, but not the sad kind of quiet. The other kind." "The other kind," I repeated. "The kind you get when you've made a decision." Another pause. "What happened?" So I told her. I told her about the note, about the 7 words in Daniel's handwriting, about driving to Patricia's office in my good cardigan with a note in my pocket, and 2 hours of conversation about estates and accounts and living arrangements. I told her everything in order, without editorializing, just letting it come out the way it had been sitting inside me for 2 days, like something waiting to be said aloud. When I finished, Dolores was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Oh, Evelyn, don't. I'm not saying you were wrong, I'm just," she exhaled. "How are you, honestly? Not, I made the right decision. How are you?" I thought about it. "Sad," I said, "and something else. Something that doesn't have a clean name." "Relief." I was quiet. "It's relief," she said, "and it's okay to feel it. You've been carrying all of this for so long. You have been holding up that entire structure, his finances, her comfort, their future, while living in a guest apartment on your own property. Evelyn, listen to what I just said. You have been living in a guest apartment on your own property." I had never heard it put that way. Something shifted slightly in my chest. "I know. And part of you has known for a long time that something wasn't right. You've told me things over the years, little things, things you explained away every time, the rearranged furniture, the bills, the way Rachel talks about the house. I know. So the relief is because you finally let yourself know what you already knew." Her voice was gentle but not soft. "And the sadness is because it's your son." I closed my eyes for a moment. Yes. Those 2 things can both be true. They are both true. We talked for another 40 minutes. By the time I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, not fixed, not solved, but seen. genuinely seen by someone who knew the full shape of me and wasn't asking me to be different than I was. That evening, I took a longer walk than usual. I went down the road past the old Henderson's place, past the elementary school with its empty parking lot, past the stretch of oak trees that turns unbearable with color in October and is bare and beautiful in a different way in December. The air was cold and clean, and I walked until my hips started to complain, and then I turned around and came home. I made soup for dinner, just for me. I watched the evening news. I went to bed at 9:30, and I lay in the dark and thought he's going to find out soon. Patricia's processes move quietly, but they move. He'll find out, and he'll come. And I thought, good, let him come. He came on the third morning, not at a reasonable hour, not in the evening when people have dinner and talk and let things settle into conversation. At 8:45 in the morning, before I'd finished my first cup of coffee, there was a knock on my apartment door. Not the polite, formal knock he'd been using these past couple of years. A harder knock, urgent, the kind of knock that announces itself before the conversation even starts. I set my coffee cup down. I walked to the door. I opened it. Daniel was standing on my small front step. He was still in his coat, like he'd come straight from somewhere or was planning to go somewhere right after, and his jaw was set in a way I recognized from when he was 14 and had convinced himself he was right about something he was completely wrong about. He looked like his father in that moment. Not in a good way. In the way that reminded me that Robert, for all his warmth, had a stubbornness in him that took years to learn how to live around. I was holding his phone. "Mom, I got a call this morning. From my bank." I stepped back from the door. "Come in. I just need to understand what's happening." "Daniel, come inside." He came in. He didn't sit down. He stood in the middle of my small living room with his coat still on and his phone still in his hand, and looked at me with an expression that was trying very hard to be controlled and not quite succeeding. "My bank called to tell me I've been removed as a secondary account holder, and then my attorney called because apparently I was listed in some kind of..." He stopped, recalibrated. "Mom, did you change your will?" I looked at him for a moment. Then I turned and walked to the kitchen counter. The note was there where I'd left it, still folded, still in the same place I'd put it 2 days ago. I picked it up and walked back to him and held it out. He stared at it. "You kept it." "I did." I took it. He unfolded it. He looked at his own handwriting for a long moment, and I watched his face move through something, recognition, then discomfort, then a return to the set jaw, the defensive posture. "This isn't Mom. This note wasn't about money." "I know. I wasn't telling you I was cutting you off. I was saying that Rachel and we've been feeling like we need to..." "Daniel," my voice was even. "What were you saying?" He looked at me. "That we need more independence." "And what did you write?" A pause. "I said you need to stop depending on me." "Right." I reached out and gently took the note back from him. So I stopped. "That's not what I meant." "But that's what you said." He ran a hand through his hair, turned away from me, turned back. "You can't just, you changed your will, Mom. That's not a small thing. That's not a response to a note that's me taking your advice," I said. "You told me to make my own plans. I made them. It was a note. I was frustrated. Rachel and I had been talking and I was feeling like there was too much overlap and He stopped again. I could see him working through it, trying to find the frame that made his behavior reasonable and my response excessive. "I didn't mean it as an ultimatum." "But you left it without talking to me. You didn't knock on my door and say, 'Mom, I've been feeling like the boundaries between us need to shift.' You wrote 7 sentences on a piece of paper and put it on my table before I woke up. What was I supposed to take from that?" He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't want to fight. We could have talked. Talking always turns into..." He stopped. "What? Finish it." "It always turns into you getting emotional, and then I feel like I've hurt you, and then nothing gets resolved." I held that for a second, because I understood it. I understood that version of me, the version that took everything personally, the version that cried at the kitchen table and made Daniel feel like a monster for having a need. I understood that she had existed and that she had made things harder, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. "You're right," I said. "That has happened. I'm not perfect at this either." He blinked. I don't think he expected that. But Daniel listened to me. I kept my voice steady. You found a way around a difficult conversation by putting words on paper and disappearing. And the words you put on paper taken at face value told me that I was a burden, that you have your own life and I need to figure out mine. So I did exactly that. I went to Patricia. I made decisions about my own estate and my own future that I should have made a long time ago, and those decisions stand. You removed me from your will. You were listed as my executor. Yes, I've changed that arrangement. Because of one note. Because of 7 years, I said. The note was just the last sentence of a very long paragraph. The room was quiet for a moment. Daniel sat down, then finally, like the standing had become too much. He dropped onto my small sofa and put his elbows on his knees and stared at the floor, and I watched him and I felt something complicated and real. Not regret, not softening, more like grief. The kind that comes not from doing the wrong thing, but from doing the right thing too late, from understanding that you cannot get back the years spent accommodating a pattern before you named it. I don't understand, he said. I don't understand how it went from a note to this. I sat down across from him. Let me help you understand. And then I talked. I talked the way I had never let myself talk to him before because I had always been too concerned with protecting him from the fullness of what I saw. Too worried about the look on his face when I named things he didn't want named. I talked about the 7 years, about the phone call from his car that started all of it, about my offer and his promise and the word temporary and what happened to that word, about the bills that became expected, about Rachel rearranging my furniture, about the conversation I was never supposed to hear through my own kitchen window, about how eventually I wouldn't need all this space. I said all of it, calmly, clearly, without tears. He listened. He didn't interrupt. I watched his face move through things he didn't have the vocabulary to hide: discomfort, recognition, something close to shame, then the instinctive defensiveness that comes when shame is more than a person can sit with. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Rachel was just talking." That was the moment. That was the moment that I understood exactly how far we had to go. I looked at my son. "Daniel, I heard your wife stand in my house and say that she was waiting for me to need less space, and your response is that she was just talking." He had the decency to look away. "That's not nothing. That's your wife making plans that involve me disappearing. And you sitting here defending it even now, even after I've laid all of this in front of you, tells me a great deal about where I stand." He looked up. His jaw was working. "Mom, that's not fair. I'm not asking you to condemn Rachel. I'm asking you to look at what I've told you and tell me honestly whether any part of it feels wrong to you. Not embarrassing, not inconvenient. Wrong." A long silence. "Some of it," he said finally. Just those 3 words. But he said them. "Okay," I said. "That's okay." We sat in the quiet for a moment. Not comfortable quiet, the working kind. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now I keep making my plans, and you start making yours. Real ones, not ones that assume I'll always be here exactly as I've been absorbing whatever you need absorbed." "And the will?" I looked at him. "The will is about my future, Daniel, not your inheritance. When I started planning my estate, I was planning the shape of my life after I'm gone, and I realized the shape I'd drawn was all about you. I hadn't left any room in it for the possibility that my future might look different than I'd imagined, so I changed it. Not to punish you, to be honest. But I'm still your son." "Yes, you are." I met his eyes. "And I love you. That part hasn't changed, and it's not going to. But love doesn't mean I arrange my entire life around your convenience and then get thanked for it with a note on my kitchen table." He was quiet again, and then in a voice that was smaller than I expected, he said, "I didn't mean it that way. The note, I want you to know that." "I believe you," I said. "I don't think you meant to hurt me. But Daniel, I'm not sure you thought about whether you would." He didn't answer that. He stayed for another 20 minutes. We talked about logistics, what would change, what the timeline looked like, practical things. The conversation never became warm exactly, but it became real. There was no performance in it, no pretending. And in that respect, it was one of the most honest conversations we had ever had, which is a complicated thing to say about a morning that started with my son standing in my doorway with a set jaw and an accusation in his eyes. When he got up to leave, he stopped at the door. He didn't turn around immediately, just stood there for a moment with his hand on the doorframe. "Mom." "Yes, I'm sorry." I waited. He still didn't turn around. Not for the note, I mean. Well, yes, for the note too. But I'm sorry for all the things in the 7 years that I never said out loud, the things I should have seen. I looked at his back, at the familiar shape of him, my son, the boy I'd raised alone after Robert died, the boy I'd sat beside through fevers and bad dreams and college applications, and the kind of grief that comes when you're 19 and you've just lost your father. That boy was still in there somewhere. I could see the outline of him underneath everything that had accumulated. "Thank you," I said. "That matters." He nodded once and walked out. I stood in the center of my apartment and listened to his footsteps going back across the yard towards the main house. I listened until I couldn't hear them anymore. Then I went back to my coffee, which was cold by now, and I drank it anyway. That afternoon I called Patricia. "He came," I told her. "How did it go?" "Better than I expected, not as well as I hoped." "That's usually how these things go." He apologized. Whether he understands what he's apologizing for is a different question. She was quiet for a moment. "And Rachel?" She wasn't there. "He came alone." I paused. That was deliberate, I think. He knew this was between him and me. Give him some credit for that. I do. I thought about the way he'd said the words "I'm sorry" while facing the door. I do give him credit. I just also know that credit and change aren't the same thing. "No," Patricia agreed. "They're not." We talked through next steps. Some of the financial changes were already in motion. The will revisions had been drawn up and needed only my signature, which I would come in to do the following week. The question of the living arrangement was more layered, more time, more conversation, more logistics. There was no clean single moment where that would resolve. It would be a process. I had made peace with that. I had made peace with the fact that none of this was going to happen in one conversation or one signed document. It was going to happen over months, maybe over years. The shape of my life was changing, and shapes don't change the way events do, suddenly completely in one clean break. They change the way light changes in a room over the course of an afternoon, slowly, continuously, until you look up and realize it's different than it was, without being able to name the exact moment it shifted. What I knew was this: I had started. I had crossed the line from enduring to deciding, and there was no going back across that line. That week, Rachel knocked on my door. I want you to understand what it meant that she knocked at all, because for months, for most of the past year, honestly, she had stopped knocking. She'd come and go through the shared yard sometimes, wave if she saw me through the window, treat the boundary between my apartment and the rest of my house like a formality that didn't quite apply to her. So when I heard 3 careful, deliberate knocks on my door on a Thursday afternoon, something in me registered the shift before I even opened it. She was standing there in her good coat. Not her house coat, not the casual one she wore to check the mail. The good coat, navy blue wool, the one she wore when she was trying to make an impression. I noted that without saying anything about it. "Evelyn, can we talk?" I stepped back from the door. "Of course." She came in and sat where Daniel had sat 2 days earlier, which struck me as either coincidence or preparation, though I couldn't have said which. She had a practiced look of earnestness on her face that I had learned over 7 years to read carefully. Rachel was not a malicious person. I want to say that clearly because this story is not a simple story about a villain. She was a person who had gotten comfortable, who had let entitlement grow slowly and quietly in the warm environment of someone else's generosity, the way plants grow toward light not out of calculation, but simply because conditions permitted it. That doesn't make it acceptable, but it makes it human. "Daniel told me about your conversation," she said. "I assumed he would. I want you to know that I'm aware things haven't been the way they should have been." She said it carefully, precisely, like someone who had thought about this sentence before she arrived. "And I want to say I'm sorry for my part in that." I looked at her. "Which part are you referring to?" A small hesitation. "All of it. The way I've taken things for granted. The fact that I moved things in your space without asking. The way we've let the financial arrangement just continue without really confronting it." She was doing a reasonable job. She was saying most of the right things. But she hadn't mentioned the window. She hadn't mentioned what she'd said to her friend about me needing less space. I waited a moment to see if she'd get there on her own. She didn't. "Rachel," I said, "is there anything else?" She looked at me with those careful, earnest eyes. "I think I've covered. I heard you talking to your friend, through the kitchen window, about this house." The color moved in her face, not dramatically, just enough. a brief loss of composure that was there and then managed in the span of about 2 seconds. I watched it happen, and I did not look away. Evelyn, I'm not telling you this to humiliate you. I'm telling you because I want you to understand the full picture of what I've seen from where I'm standing. I've seen the small things and I've seen the larger things. And the largest thing is that I stood on my own lawn and heard my daughter-in-law discussing when I would no longer be inconveniently occupying my own home. The room was very quiet. That wasn't... She stopped. It wasn't as cold as it sounds. It was cold enough. She looked down at her hands. I don't think I realized, she said quietly, how much we'd started to see this place as ours. It snuck up on me. That's not an excuse. I know it's not, but it's what happened. I know, I said. I watched it happen. Why didn't you say something? And there it was. The question that I had been waiting for without knowing I was waiting for it. The question that turned the mirror toward me. Because I was afraid of the answer, I said. And the honesty of saying it out loud surprised even me. Because some part of me believed that if I named the problem, the relationship would crack. And I wanted the relationship more than I wanted the truth. For a long time, I wanted the relationship more than I wanted the truth. She looked up. And now? She asked. Now I want both, I said. And I've accepted that if I can only have one, I'll take the truth. The silence stretched between us, long enough to be real, long enough to mean something. What do you need from us? She said finally. Honesty. Going forward. Just honesty. I looked at her steadily. Not performance. Not managed apologies for the things you think I know about while protecting the things you think I don't. Actual honesty. Can you do that? She held my gaze. I can try. That's enough for now, I said. Trying is enough. She left 20 minutes later. No tears, no dramatic embraces. Just two women who had spent years in each other's orbits without ever quite being honest, agreeing to do better tentatively, imperfectly, with no guarantee it would hold. I stood at the window after she left and watched her walk back across the yard, and I felt something complicate itself inside me. Because this was the part no one tells you about when you finally stand up for yourself. They tell you about the strength of it, the clarity, the relief. They don't always tell you about the grief that comes alongside the grief, for the years you didn't do it sooner, for the version of your relationship that might have existed if you'd been braver earlier, for the simple, painful fact that love and disappointment are not opposites, and you can feel them both at the same time for the same person. I loved my son. I was disappointed in him. Both of those things were completely true. I had extended enormous grace to his wife. I was also angry with her. Both of those things were completely true. I was relieved to have started something new. I was sad about what had to break to get there. Both of those things were completely true. This is what I kept learning. The truth is never one thing. The truth is always several things happening at the same time, and the only honest way to carry it is to carry all of it, rather than choosing the parts that are easiest to hold. That night after dinner, I sat down at my small desk, and I began to write. Not a note, not a grievance, just a list of things I wanted. Not things I wanted for Daniel, not things I wanted for my family or my legacy or anyone else's future. Things I wanted for me, for Evelyn Harper, the woman who had gotten so good at accommodating everyone else that she had forgotten she was allowed to want things at all. I wrote, I want mornings that belong to me. I want a home where nothing moves without my permission. I want to go somewhere new, somewhere I've never been, somewhere that has no history attached to it, no memories of Robert's illness or Daniel's childhood, or the long years of keeping everything together by sheer force of will. I want to sit somewhere beautiful and feel nothing but the beauty of it. I want to figure out who I am when I'm not taking care of someone. I want time, just time, mine. I looked at the list for a long time, and then I added one more thing. I want to forgive my son, not because he deserves it yet, but because I deserve to put the weight down. I folded the paper, put it in the desk drawer, turned off the light, and I let the next chapter begin. The list stayed in my desk drawer for 11 days. I know it was 11 days because I counted them. Not obsessively, not the way you count days when you're waiting for something painful to end. More the way you count them when you're watching something grow. 11 days of ordinary mornings and quiet evenings, and the strange new sensation of a life that was beginning slowly and without fanfare to rearrange itself around what I actually needed rather than what everyone else did. In those 11 days, Daniel and I did not have another conversation, not a real one. We saw each other twice, once when I was coming back from a walk, and he was getting into his car, and we exchanged the kind of careful nod that people exchange when they've said something important and haven't yet figured out what comes after it. The second time he knocked on my door with a question about the utility account, something administrative, something that needed a decision, and we handled it in 5 minutes efficiently without reopening anything. He was careful with me. I was measured with him. We were, I suppose, treating each other with the particular delicacy of people who have recently broken something valuable and are not yet sure whether it can be repaired. Rachel I didn't see at all. That wasn't avoidance on either of our parts. It was just the geography of a house that, when everyone respects the boundaries, turns out to have more than enough space for people not to collide. I want to tell you that the silence was peaceful. Parts of it were. But parts of it were also the hardest kind of quiet, the kind that has questions living inside it. In the evening, sitting in my reading chair with my book open and my mind not quite in it, I would find myself doing the math of my situation. The real math. Not the financial calculations Patricia and I had worked through, but the human ones. The calculations of time and age and what remains and what is still possible. I was 68 years old. I was in good health, better than many women my age. My doctor reminded me every year with what I think was genuine surprise. My mind was sharp. My hip gave me trouble in the cold, but nothing that slowed me substantially. I had, if I was lucky and took reasonable care of myself, perhaps 20 more good years. Maybe more. Women in my family had lived long. My mother made it to 91, her sister to 88. 20 years. That's not nothing. That's not the tail end of a life. That's another life if you use it right. The question was what I intended to do with it. And that question, sitting inside the 11 days of quiet, was what finally pushed me to open the desk drawer and look at my list again. I want mornings that belong to me. I want a home where nothing moves without my permission. I want to go somewhere new. I want to sit somewhere beautiful and feel nothing but the beauty of it. I want to figure out who I am when I'm not taking care of someone. I read it 3 times. Then I picked up my phone and called a real estate agent. Her name was Sandra Cho, and she'd been recommended to me by a colleague from my hospital years, someone who'd made a similar move 3 years earlier, and described Sandra as the kind of person who listened first and talked second, which in real estate is rarer than it should be. Sandra picked up with a brisk cheerfulness that I found immediately reassuring. Sandra Cho Properties. Sandra, my name is Evelyn Harper. I was referred by a former colleague, Margaret Ostrowski. I'm looking to sell a property in Asheville and potentially purchase something new, somewhere different. A brief pause. Different as in different neighborhood or different as in different state? Different as in somewhere I've never been that has nothing attached to it? Another pause. Longer this time. And then, Mrs. Harper, I think you and I are going to get along just fine. We talked for 40 minutes that first call. I told her about the house, the size, the guest apartment, the backyard, the location. Good bones, good land. The kind of property that would move well in a market that still favored older homes with space and history. Sandra listened, asked sharp questions, didn't fill silences unnecessarily. By the end of the call, she had enough to begin a preliminary assessment, and I had agreed to an in-person meeting the following week. I hung up and sat with what I'd just done, because I had just set something in motion that could not easily be undone. I had called a real estate agent about my house. The house I had lived in for 22 years. The house where I had planted the rose bush after Robert died. The house where Daniel had learned to ride a bicycle in the driveway, where I had hosted Thanksgiving for 11 consecutive years, where I had sat on the back porch on summer evenings and watched the light change and felt for small stretches of time that everything was exactly as it should be. I was thinking about selling that house, and the feeling that came with that thought was not what I expected. I expected grief. I expected hesitation, the second guessing that comes when you've decided something large and your body tries to talk you out of it. Instead, what I felt was almost like excitement. Quiet, tentative, but real. I hadn't felt that in years. The meeting with Sandra was on a Wednesday morning, 11 days after the drawer, 12 days after Daniel's visit, 15 days after the note. She arrived at 9 and I led her into the main house. Daniel and Rachel were both at work and she walked through every room with the particular combination of speed and attention that good professionals use, the kind that suggests they're seeing a dozen things at once without appearing to rush. She asked questions constantly. Age of the roof. Last time the HVAC was serviced. Whether the guest apartment had its own separate meter. I answered everything she asked. And then when the walkthrough was done, and we were sitting at the kitchen table, my kitchen table in my kitchen, she looked at me with a directness I appreciated and said, "Mrs. Harper, I want to ask you something personal, and you can tell me it's none of my business." "Go ahead. Who else is living here?" I held her gaze. "My son and his wife, in the main house." "And you're in the guest apartment?" "Yes." She nodded slowly, not judgmentally, more like someone fitting the last piece of a puzzle into place. "And does your son know you're thinking about selling?" "Not yet." "Okay." She made a note on her pad. "That's going to be a conversation." "I know. Do you want to talk about the timeline? Because there's the timeline that works best for the market, and then there's the timeline that works best for your situation. They're not always the same." "What does the market say?" "Spring, late March, early April. That's when this kind of property gets the best attention. You'd want to list by end of March to catch the early spring buyers." I calculated. That was roughly 4 months away. 4 months to have the conversation with Daniel. 4 months to sort the logistics. 4 months to figure out where I was going. "What does my situation say?" She looked at me steadily. "Your situation says you need enough time to be honest with your son without it feeling like an ambush. Find somewhere that you actually want to go and make sure you're selling because you're moving towards something rather than just away from this." I stared at her for a moment. "Margaret said you listened first." "I try to." "She was right about you." Sandra smiled. "So, 4 months. Are we doing this?" "We're doing this." I told Daniel on a Friday evening 3 days after meeting with Sandra. I had thought about how to do it. I'd considered writing him a letter ironic, given how this all started, but that felt wrong. I'd considered waiting until the logistics were more settled, but that felt cowardly. In the end, I did the simplest thing. I knocked on his door at 6 in the evening, and when he opened it and saw my face, whatever he was going to say next died in his throat. "Can I come in?" I asked. He stepped back. I walked into my own main house for the first time in weeks. Rachel was in the kitchen, and she turned when she heard me, and her expression did something careful, and still the way faces do when they're bracing for information they haven't received yet. I sat down at their dining room table. They both sat down across from me. The 3 of us at a table in a house that was technically mine, looking at each other across a distance that was not about furniture. "I've made a decision," I said. "I want to tell you together because it affects both of you, and you deserve to hear it at the same time." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Mom, I'm selling the house." The silence that followed that sentence was the loudest silence I had ever sat inside. Rachel's hands went flat on the table. Daniel went very still. "I've spoken with a real estate agent," I continued. "We're looking at a spring listing late March or early April. That gives you approximately 4 months to make arrangements." "4 months," Daniel repeated. "Yes, Mom." His voice was careful in the way that meant he was working very hard to keep it that way. "This house has been, you've lived here for 22 years. I know how long I've lived here. And you called an agent without—" He stopped himself, recalibrated. "Did you think about talking to us first?" I looked at him. "Daniel, did you think about talking to me before you left that note on my table?" The room was very quiet. He had the grace to absorb that without fighting it. Rachel had not spoken yet. She was looking at her hands on the table. I watched her face, and I thought I understood what was happening inside it, the rapid recalculation of a future that had seemed settled. The house, the space, the arrangement she had let herself believe was permanent. "Rachel," I said, "do you have anything you want to say?" She looked up. Her eyes were bright. Not crying, not yet. Just bright. "Where are you going to go?" It was such a human question. Not the defensive one, not the practical one. Just "Where are you going?" "I don't know yet," I said. "Somewhere new. That's the only thing I'm sure of." She nodded once. Something moved across her face that I hadn't expected. Something that looked almost like understanding. Daniel leaned forward. "Mom, I want to be honest with you. Please." "I'm scared." He said it plainly without dressing it up. "I know I don't have the right to be given everything. I know this is your house and your money and your decision, but I'm scared. Because this means we actually have to figure it out, on our own, and I don't know if we can." I looked at my son. I was 43 years old and sitting across from me at my dining room table telling me he was scared to manage his own life. And the thing I felt in that moment was not contempt, not satisfaction, not even frustration. What I felt was something close to sorrow. Because this was what I had done without meaning to. This was the full cost of 7 years of cushioning. I had been so determined to ensure he never fell that I had never allowed him to learn what it felt like to catch himself. And here he was at 43, afraid of the ordinary weight of adult life, and some portion of that fear had my fingerprints on it. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. "Daniel, you're going to be fine. You are a capable person with a capable wife, and you have spent 7 years here with your expenses subsidized. Whatever you've saved during those years is enough to build on. You can do this." "What if we can't?" "Then you will figure out what to do when that becomes clear. That's how adults handle it. Not by leaning on someone until the leaning breaks them." He flinched. "I'm not saying that to hurt you," I said. "I'm saying it because it's true and because I should have said it years ago." Rachel looked up. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Evelyn, I owe you an apology that's larger than the one I gave you last week." I waited. "I got comfortable," she said. "I know you heard me through the window. I know you've known about that, and I've been carrying it around hoping you might not bring it up again." She stopped. That was cowardly, and it was wrong. What I said, what I felt even, was wrong. I looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you for saying that. Does it change anything, the house?" "No," I said gently, "but it changes us, if we want it to." She nodded, and this time the brightness in her eyes spilled over. Just slightly, just enough. We sat at that table for another hour. We talked about timelines, about what they needed to do about the guest apartment, and how it would factor into the sale. We talked practically and honestly, and without the performance of a family pretending everything is fine. It was in the way of things that are hard and necessary, one of the better conversations I had with them in years. When I stood to leave, Daniel walked me to the door. He opened it and then stood with his hand on the frame, just as he had stood the week before in my apartment, facing me this time, not away. "Mom, are you happy right now? Not in theory, right now." I thought about it honestly. "I'm not happy yet," I said, "but I'm something better. I'm moving." He smiled. Small and complicated, but real. "Okay," he said. "Okay." Over the following weeks, things moved. That's the only way to describe it. Not dramatically, not with any single moment you could point to and say there, that was when everything changed. It moved the way a river moves, continuously, inevitably carrying things along with it, whether or not they were ready to go. Sandra came back for the formal assessment. The numbers were good, better than I'd let myself hope, actually. The property market in that part of North Carolina had held steady, and the guest apartment was a significant selling point, the kind of feature that attracted a specific and motivated kind of buyer. Sandra was confident about the spring timeline. I signed the preliminary agreements. Patricia and I finalized the will revisions. I signed the documents on a gray Tuesday morning in her office with her assistant as witness, and I sat across from Patricia afterward while she shuffled papers, and I thought about Robert the way I often did at formal moments, wondering what he would have said about all of this. I thought he would have approved. Not happily, Robert hated conflict, even necessary conflict, but he would have seen the integrity in it. He would have put his hand on the back of my neck the way he used to, and said in that quiet way of his, "You're doing the right thing, Ev." I was as sure of that as I was of almost anything. I spent an afternoon in early December going through the main house with Daniel and Rachel, talking about what was theirs and what was mine. It was a strange afternoon, sorting through years of accumulated living, figuring out which chairs had been theirs before they moved in, and which ones were mine, which pieces of furniture they'd want to take, and which they wouldn't have room for in an apartment. There were moments of unexpected laughter, the absurdity of two adults solemnly debating the ownership of a particular end table that neither of us was entirely sure we wanted. There were also moments of silence that sat differently than silence had sat between us before. Warmer, more honest. At one point, Rachel picked up a framed photograph from the bookshelf in the main living room. It was from Thanksgiving several years earlier, all three of us at the big table with a cousin of Daniel's who had since moved to Portland. Everyone was laughing at something just off camera. Rachel looked at it for a moment and then held it out to me. "This should be yours," she said. I took it, looked at it. "We were a family here," I said, not accusatory, just true. "We were," Rachel agreed. "We still are, just differently." I put the photograph in the box of things I was keeping. Differently. It was a word that did a lot of work, that word. It held everything that had happened and everything that still needed to happen and left space for a future that none of us had mapped out yet. I was learning to be comfortable in that unmapped space. I wasn't good at it yet. Some nights I lay awake and the uncertainty of it pressed down on me, not the financial uncertainty which I had managed, but the existential kind, the you're 68 years old and starting over kind, the what if the new place is lonely kind, the what if the freedom you've been wanting turns out to be just a different kind of empty kind. Those thoughts came. I'm not going to pretend they didn't. But I had a practice I developed in those quiet nights when the doubts arrived. I would get up and go to my desk and open the drawer and read the list, not to reassure myself, not as a kind of incantation, just to remember that I had wanted something for myself, that the wanting was real and had come from a real place inside me, that it had been there before the note and before Patricia's office and before any of the decisions. It had been there all along, buried under everything I'd let pile on top of it. The wanting was mine, and it was enough to get me back to sleep. It was in the third week of December on a Thursday afternoon that the first real twist came. Not from Daniel, not from Rachel, not from Patricia or Sandra or any of the expected directions. It came from a phone call I received at 2 p.m. from a number I didn't recognize with a Colorado area code. I almost didn't pick up. I'd developed a reasonable policy about unknown numbers. If it's important, they'll leave a message. But something made me answer. Later I would think about that. About the strange small hinges on which large things turn. Mrs. Harper, my name is Carol Whitfield. I'm a realtor in Summit County, Colorado. I'm reaching out because I received your information from Sandra Cho, who I worked with on a referral last year. She thought you might be looking at properties in our area. I sat down. She reached out to you. She said you mentioned wanting somewhere new, somewhere you'd never been. I specialize in lake properties. We've got some beautiful listings around Dillon Reservoir and some of the smaller mountain lakes. Sandra thought you might be interested in taking a look. I had mentioned Colorado to Sandra in passing as one possibility among several. I hadn't followed up on it. I had assumed it was too far, too different, too dramatic a change for a 68-year-old woman who had lived in the same state for most of her life. Sandra apparently had taken me more seriously than I had taken myself. What kind of properties? I asked. Carol described several, smaller homes, manageable sizes, the kind of places designed for 1 or 2 people rather than for holding a family. Mountain views, lake access, quiet communities with enough of a town nearby for errands and the company of other people without the noise of a city. I listened to her for 20 minutes, and I felt something building in me while I listened, something that started small and kept growing. Not certainty, I was not certain, but something close to recognition, the feeling of hearing a description that fits a shape you'd already made inside yourself without quite knowing it. When she finished, I said, "Send me the listings, all of them." "Of course. And Mrs. Harper, would you consider coming out to see them?" "In person, I know it's a significant trip, but there's a difference between photographs and standing somewhere." I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "When?" I asked. "Whenever works for you. I'm flexible." "The week after Christmas," I said. "If that works." "That works perfectly." I hung up the phone. I sat in my apartment in Asheville, North Carolina, in the house I was about to sell, and I thought, Colorado. The word sat in my chest like something new. I had never been to Colorado. I had never been anywhere, really, not alone, not freely. My travel had always been tethered to something. Family vacations with Robert and young Daniel, conferences for work, the occasional trip to visit a relative that was more obligation than adventure. I had always assumed that someday when things were settled, when everyone was okay, I would go somewhere just for myself. Someday had never come. Until now. I called Dolores. "I'm going to Colorado," I said when she picked up. A pause. "When did this happen?" "About 10 minutes ago." She laughed, really laughed. "Evelyn Harper, who are you right now?" "I'm working on figuring that out," I said. "But I think Colorado might help." I told Daniel and Rachel about the Colorado trip at dinner. I had gotten into the habit in those weeks of having dinner with them once a week, not out of obligation, but out of genuine choice, which made it entirely different. Thursday evenings at the big kitchen table in the main house. It was Rachel who had suggested it actually, and I had accepted. The Thursday before Christmas after we'd eaten, I told them. Daniel put his fork down. Colorado. Summit County. A realtor there has some lake properties she wants to show me. Rachel leaned forward. Are you serious? I am. Mom. Daniel looked at me with an expression that had shifted from the guarded, careful face of the past few weeks into something more unguarded, more like himself, actually. That's a big move. I know. That's a long way from here. Yes. I was quiet for a moment, processing. I watched him turn it over. And then something happened that I did not anticipate. He said, I think that might be good for you. I looked at him. I mean it, he said. Something new. Somewhere that's just yours. He paused. You deserve that, Mom. I mean that I mean it genuinely. Rachel reached across and put her hand briefly on my arm. We'll come visit. You'd better, I said. And the three of us sat in the warmth of the kitchen, in the house that would soon no longer be mine, and for the first time in a very long time, we were simply a family, imperfect and navigating and honest, but a family. I flew to Colorado on December 27th. I remember the descent, the way the mountains appeared through the airplane window, enormous and white and utterly indifferent to whatever was small and human below them. I remember pressing my hand against the window glass and thinking I have never been here before. Not one moment of my life has been spent in this place. It is entirely new. I can't tell you what it meant to be somewhere entirely new. I had forgotten what it felt like. To step off a plane and walk through an airport in a city where no one knew your name or your history or the weight of everything you'd been carrying. To get into a rental car in a parking structure and drive out into air, so cold and clean it almost hurt to breathe with mountains filling every horizon, and feel for the first time in years completely anonymous. Anonymous is not the right word. Free is closer. Carol Whitfield was everything Sandra had promised. Practical, warm, knowledgeable, with a directness that I had come to appreciate in the people I chose to spend time with. She picked me up at my hotel on the 28th, and we drove out to the first property. The first two didn't do it for me. Nice houses, good bones, but they didn't speak. The third one did. It was smaller than I expected, smaller than the apartment I'd been living in for the past 7 years even. 2 bedrooms, an open main room with windows that looked over a frozen lake so flat and white it seemed to merge with the sky at the edges. A small deck, a fireplace, a kitchen that got afternoon light. I stood in the middle of the main room while Carol gave me space, and I was very quiet. And something in me that had been holding for a very long time let go. Not dramatically, not with tears, just a slow, complete release. The way a fist opens, the way a breath comes out all the way when you haven't realized you'd been holding it. I thought about the list in my desk drawer. I want somewhere new. I want somewhere that has no history attached to it. I want to sit somewhere beautiful and feel nothing but the beauty of it. The lake was frozen and the sky was enormous, and the house was quiet in the way of places that have been waiting for the right person to come fill them. I turned around. Carol, she looked at me. Tell me about the offer process. The look on her face told me she'd seen that expression before. She'd seen it on people who had just found the thing they didn't know they were looking for until it was right in front of them. Let's sit down, she said. I sat down in my future home. And I started to talk about what came next. The offer was accepted on January 4th. I was back in Asheville when Carol called, standing in my apartment kitchen, still in my coat from a walk when my phone rang, and her voice came through with the kind of warm professionalism that only barely contained the actual good news underneath it. Mrs. Harper, they accepted. Full ask, 30-day close possession on February 10th. I stood there with my coat still on and my hand around my phone, and I said nothing for a moment. Not because I was shocked. I had been expecting this call since I'd made the offer. But there is a difference between expecting something and feeling it land. There is a distance between the decision and the reality of it that you don't fully cross until someone calls you and says it's done. February 10th, I repeated. That gives you about 5 weeks. Is that going to work on your end? I thought about Sandra, about the Asheville listing which was going live in late March, about Daniel and Rachel, who had 5 weeks to begin the concrete process of figuring out their next step, about the movers, the packing the 22 years of a life that needed to be sorted into what came with me and what stayed behind. 5 weeks. It'll work, I said. Congratulations, Mrs. Harper. You own a home in Colorado. I hung up. I took off my coat. I hung it by the door. And then I sat down on my couch, and I put my face in my hands and I cried. Not sadly, not with grief or not only with grief. The way you cry when something that has been closed for a very long time finally opens. The way you cry when you realize that the life you are stepping into is not a consolation prize for the one you lost. It is something real, something yours, something you chose with clear eyes and your own 2 hands. I cried for about 4 minutes. Then I washed my face, picked up my phone and called Dolores. "I bought a house," I said. She screamed, literally, into the phone at a volume that made me hold the receiver away from my ear and laugh. "Evelyn Harper, you absolute legend. Tell me everything." So I did. I told Daniel that evening. I had been deliberate about the order, Carol first, Dolores second, Daniel third. I needed the certainty of it settled in me before I brought it to him. I needed to have fully claimed it for myself before I offered it up to another person's reaction. I was alone when I knocked. Rachel was at a book club, and there was something about the 2 of us, just mother and son at the kitchen table in the early January dark, that felt right for this particular conversation. I sat down across from him. "I have news," I said. He read my face the way children always can read their parents' faces, even when they're 43 years old and sitting in a house they're about to have to leave. He read it, and something moved in his expression, something that was trying to be prepared. "Colorado," he said. "I made an offer before I left. They accepted today. I take possession February 10th. He was quiet for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car passed on the road. "February 10th, he repeated. "Yes, which means the Asheville house will go on the market in March as planned, and you and Rachel will need to have made your arrangements before then." "Before then." He said it flatly, not angry, just absorbing. "Daniel, you've had the timeline since October. This isn't a surprise." "I know." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I know. It's not a surprise. It just, February 10th sounds different than spring. Spring sounds theoretical. February 10th sounds like a Tuesday." "It's a Wednesday, actually." He looked at me, and then unexpectedly he laughed. Short and surprised and genuine, the laugh he'd had since he was a boy. Sudden, a little helpless, like laughter that arrives before the decision to laugh does. "A Wednesday," he said. "Right, okay." The laughter faded. We sat in the quiet together. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Yes." Do you actually want this? The Colorado house? Not just the change, but that specific place. Do you want it?" I thought about standing in the middle of that main room with the frozen lake through the window, the way the silence had felt different there, full rather than empty, possible rather than heavy. "Yes," I said, "I want it." "Then I'm glad." He said it simply, without performance. "I mean that." "I know you do." He looked at the table for a moment. "I want to say something, and I need you to let me get through it without interrupting, because I've been trying to figure out how to say it since the note, really." I waited. I've been thinking a lot about why I wrote it that way. The note. And the honest answer is that I wrote it because I was angry, and I thought I was being honest, and I didn't think about what it meant from where you were standing. I was only thinking about where I was standing. He looked up. "That's not an excuse. I know it's not an excuse, but it's the truth. I wasn't seeing you. I was just seeing my own frustration." I held his gaze. "What were you frustrated about?" "Feeling like we couldn't make a move in this house without it being about you. Like every decision Rachel and I made was somehow like you were always there just at the edge of things, and I didn't know how to—" He stopped, started again. "I couldn't figure out how to build my own life when it was happening inside yours, and I handled that wrong. I know I handled it wrong." The room was very quiet. "Daniel," I chose my words carefully, "what you just described, that feeling of not being able to build your life inside of mine. Do you understand that that feeling was information? That the answer to that feeling wasn't a note left on a table, but was the very thing that's happening now, you moving, making your own space, being genuinely separate?" He was quiet. "I should have encouraged that years ago," I said. "That's on me. I made it too easy to stay. I made staying feel like the right choice when really I was protecting myself as much as I was helping you. Because if you stayed, I wasn't alone, and I was afraid of being alone." Something shifted in his face. "Mom, I'm telling you this because you deserve the full picture, not just your failures in this story. Mine too. We got to this note because of decisions we both made over 7 years. The note was just where we ran out of road." He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. His hand felt like Robert's in that moment, the same wide palm, the same warmth. I hadn't noticed that before, or maybe I had noticed and never let myself sit with it. "I'm going to miss you," he said. "When you're in Colorado, I'm going to actually miss you." "Good," I said. "That's how it's supposed to work." He squeezed my hand once. We sat there for a while longer, not talking, just sitting. Mother and son in a kitchen that had held years of their shared life on the edge of something new that they had both in different ways been moving toward for longer than either of them had known. The 5 weeks that followed moved faster than any 5 weeks I can remember. Rachel cried when I told her about the Colorado house, not the careful, managed brightness I'd seen from her before. Real tears, unexpected, the kind that surprised her as much as they surprised me. She stood in the middle of the kitchen and pressed her hand over her mouth and said through her fingers, "I'm going to miss you so much more than I thought I would." I put my arms around her. She was stiff. At first she'd always been the kind of person who received physical comfort awkwardly, as though her body hadn't been told what to do with it. And then she wasn't stiff. She leaned into me, and I held her, and I thought about what Dolores had said, that love and disappointment are not opposites, that you can hold both for the same person, that it's the holding of both rather than the choosing of one that makes the love real. "We're going to be okay," I said into her hair. "All of us. Promise?" "No," I said, "but I believe it, and that's something." She pulled back and looked at me. Her makeup was slightly wrecked, and she didn't reach to fix it, which I found for some reason the most endearing thing she had ever done in my presence. "Evelyn, I need you to know something." She said it deliberately, like she'd been carrying it for a while. The things I said through the window about the space, I didn't mean them the way they sounded, but I can't completely pretend I didn't feel them. There was a part of me that was already thinking about this place as ours, and I'm ashamed of that. "Don't be ashamed," I said. "Just be honest, with me and with yourself. Shame closes things down. Honesty opens them." She nodded, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "You're a hard woman to stay angry at." "I'm not so easy to live with either," I said. "Believe me, I know that." She laughed a little, and the laugh was real, and the realness of it was worth more than 100 careful performances. In the weeks that followed, Rachel threw herself into planning with a focus that I came to understand was her way of processing emotion by acting on it rather than sitting inside it. She found them an apartment within 2 weeks, a good one, nicer than I expected, in a part of Asheville they'd always wanted to be closer to. She negotiated the lease herself, organized the move-made lists, and checked them off with the kind of efficient energy that had probably always been in her, but had been given little reason to surface when everything was already being handled. Watching her do it, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Pride. Not the possessive kind, not the kind that says, "Look what I made," the other kind. The kind that is genuinely glad to witness someone find their footing. Daniel, meanwhile, did something that surprised me more than anything that had happened in the previous months. He sat down with their finances and went through every number with a thoroughness I had never seen from him before. He called me one evening not for help, but to tell me what he'd found. "We're okay, Mom. I mean, we actually have a real cushion. I don't know if I realized how much we'd saved while we were here." "That was the point," I said. I know it was. I never actually looked at it before. I kept thinking of us as people who were barely keeping up, but we weren't. We'd stopped keeping track." "Are you going to keep track now?" "Yes." A pause. "Rachel set up a spreadsheet." I smiled. "Of course she did. It's actually really thorough." "I believe you." He was quiet for a moment. "Mom, I think maybe we were more ready to be independent than we knew. We just never had a reason to find out." "Now you do," I said. "Yeah." Another pause. "Thank you for making us find out." I held the phone for a moment and thought about what it costs to make the right call. About the years of convincing yourself that the comfortable thing and the kind thing are the same thing when they aren't always, and about the moment you finally stop confusing them. "Thank you for giving me a reason to," I said. Moving day was the first Saturday in February. Not the Colorado move that came later. This was Daniel and Rachel's move. The day they took their things and their life and crossed the threshold of my house into their own. I woke up early that morning and I made coffee, and I stood at my apartment window and I listened to the sounds of it, the truck pulling in, the voices, footsteps going back and forth across the yard, the particular rhythm of a life packing itself up and going. I had offered to help, and they had told me not to. "Let us do this one ourselves," Daniel had said, and I had understood. Around noon, Daniel knocked on my apartment door. "We're done," he said. "Last load just went." I walked outside with him into the February cold. The driveway was empty. The main house was quiet in the particular way of recently vacated spaces, when the air still holds the shape of whoever just left. We stood there together for a moment. "How does it feel?" I asked. He considered it. "Like something starting." He looked at me. "You, same." He put his arm around my shoulders. First time he'd done that in years, since before the arrangement began, maybe since before Robert died. I stayed very still under the weight of it, the way you stay still when something fragile arrives, afraid to disturb it. "I love you, Mom," he said. "I love you too," I said. "Always." We stood there in the cold until the moment passed its natural length, and then he kissed my cheek and got in his car. I watched him drive down the road until his car disappeared around the bend, and then I turned and looked at my house. Empty now. Mine again. Completely. I went inside. I walked through every room of the main house for the first time in 7 years as the only person in it. The rooms were bare in places, and not in others they'd left some things taken. Others in the mix created a strange archaeology of the years we'd all shared the space. A mark on the kitchen wall where Rachel's coat hooks had been. The faint ghost of a picture frame on the living room wall that I'd hung in 2003, and they'd taken down sometime in the arrangement years and replaced with something of their own. I stood in the middle of my living room and breathed. The house smelled like itself again, like wood and old construction, and the particular neutral cleanliness of a space that had been loved and lived in, and was now again waiting. I said goodbye to it quietly, the way you say goodbye to something that cannot hear you, but deserves to be spoken to anyway. I thanked it for the 22 years, for the Thanksgivings and the ordinary Tuesdays, and the morning after Robert's funeral, when I had come home and sat on the kitchen floor because the chair felt like too much and the house had simply held me. "You were a good house," I said out loud to no one. My voice echoed slightly. I turned off the light and walked back to my apartment, and I started to pack. The Colorado move happened on February 9th and 10th. I hired movers, young men, efficient and careful, who packed the apartment in a single day and loaded the truck in the morning of the 10th, while I drove to the airport with one suitcase and my good cardigan and Robert's photograph wrapped in a sweater in my carry-on bag. I had learned from the logistics of it, not everything needed to travel with me. The important things would arrive. The essential things were already in me. I flew into Denver, and Carol picked me up and drove me the 2 hours to the house. The close had happened remotely cleanly. The key was already waiting. Carol handed it to me in the driveway. "Ready?" she asked. I held the key. I thought about the 68 years that had brought me here. About Robert, who deserved to be standing beside me for this. About Daniel, who had handed me this moment, without intending to, with 7 words on a piece of paper on a Tuesday morning. About the note folded in my desk drawer back in Asheville, in a box on a moving truck somewhere on I-70, the note I had kept because I understood that it was not the villain of this story. It was the hinge, the moment the story turned. About the list in that same drawer, the wanting, the mornings that belonged to me, the home where nothing moved without my permission, the place I'd never been that had no history attached to it. About the woman I had been for 68 years, and the woman I was standing in a Colorado driveway in February with a key in her hand and the rest of her life in front of her. "Ready," I said. I put the key in the lock. I opened the door. The house was cold. It had been empty for a month and the heat had been set low. My breath showed in the air. The afternoon light came through the windows over the lake and fell across the floor in long, pale rectangles, and the whole space was quiet, with the particular silence of somewhere waiting to begin. I stepped inside. I stood in the center of the main room, and I thought mine, just mine, completely mine. Nothing here belonged to anyone's history but the history I was bringing with me. Nothing here would need to be negotiated or explained or apologized for. Nothing here would move without my decision. The mornings here would be mine from the first moment of the first day to the last moment of the last, for as long as I was here to have them. I set my bag down. I took off my coat. I found the thermostat and turned up the heat. And then I sat down on the floor. Not on furniture. There was no furniture yet, just on the floor of my new living room, with the lake through the windows, and the silence around me, and the light falling, the way it does at 3 p.m. in February when the sun is low, and everything it touches looks like something worth keeping. I sat there for a long time. I was not sad. I was not lonely. I was not the woman who had found a note on her kitchen table and felt like a fool. I was not the woman who had spent decades living in the margins of her own life, making herself small so that others could make themselves large. I was not the woman who had been so afraid of being alone that she had built an entire architecture of dependence around herself and called it love. I was Evelyn Harper, 68 years old, sitting on the floor of her own house. In a state she had never visited before, in a town she didn't know yet, without a single plan, except the plan to find out who she was when she finally had the space to find out. The heat came on. The house began to warm. I leaned my back against the wall and I closed my eyes and I listened to the quiet. And it was the most beautiful thing I had heard in years. That evening I called Daniel. My phone was at 11% battery because I'd forgotten to charge it on the plane, a very Evelyn thing to do, according to Dolores, who says I could forget my phone battery in a charging station, and I sat on the floor because I still had no chairs with my back against the wall and the dark outside the windows and the heat now working steadily around me. He picked up on the second ring. "Mom, you made it." "I made it." "How is it?" I looked around at the empty room. At the bare walls and the uncovered windows and the boxes that hadn't arrived yet, and the floor that was going to need a rug and the kitchen I hadn't fully investigated, and the second bedroom that was going to be a proper guest room for when he and Rachel came to visit. "It's empty," I said, "and it's exactly right." He was quiet for a moment. Yeah. I heard something in the background, Rachel's voice asking if that was me, Daniel saying yes. Then, "She wants me to tell you that she already bought you a housewarming plant. She says it's a succulent because they're hard to kill." I laughed. "Tell her thank you. Tell her that's very thoughtful and also very accurate about my track record with plants." Rachel's laugh in the background. Daniel came back. "Mom, are you happy?" The same question he had asked me the night I told him I was moving. The night I'd said I'm not happy yet, but I'm something better. I'm moving. I thought about it. I looked at the light coming in from the lake, at the new walls of my new house, at the life I had chosen deliberately with both hands open. "Yes," I said, "right now, tonight, I'm happy." A pause, long enough to mean something. "Good," Daniel said. And the word was full in a way that words usually aren't, full of everything that had happened between us, and everything that was going to happen in the entire complicated ongoing work of two people who loved each other, trying to figure out how to do that without breaking each other. "Good," he said again, quieter. "Get some sleep," I said. "Your new apartment has early mornings." "So does your new house. Mine are going to be better," he laughed. "Probably. Definitely." We said goodnight. I plugged in my phone. I had found the charger, and I sat in the quiet for a while longer. Then I unpacked the one bag I had brought with me, the essentials, the things that needed to be in reach before the truck arrived. My toothbrush, my medications, a change of clothes, and Robert's photograph, which I unwrapped from the sweater with careful hands and set against the wall on the floor because I didn't have a shelf yet. I looked at him for a moment. "We made it, Robert," I said. I know you'd have found us a better route. But we made it." I got ready for bed. I lay down on the air mattress I'd shipped ahead. Practical, Dolores had said, and she'd been right in the main room because the bedroom didn't feel settled yet, with the lake outside the window, black and still, and the stars overhead, and the silence absolute in the way of places that have never been loud. I thought about the list. I thought about every item on it, and I fell asleep in the first minute, deep and complete and dreamless, the way you sleep when you are finally exactly where you are supposed to be. The moving truck arrived on February 12th, 2 days late because of weather on I-70, a storm that closed the pass overnight and held everything on the other side of the mountain until the roads cleared. I spent those 2 days in an empty house with an air mattress, a single bag, and more quiet than I had experienced in decades. No television yet, no furniture, just the house and the lake and the silence and me. I want to tell you those 2 days were hard. They weren't. They were the strangest gift I had received in years. With nothing to arrange and nothing to manage and no one needing anything from me, I was left with only my own company. And I discovered something that surprised me completely. My own company was enough, more than enough. I walked every morning around the lake, down the road, wherever my feet wanted to go without a destination attached. I ate simple things. I slept when I was tired. I sat by the window and watched the light move across the frozen lake. And I thought thoughts that had nothing to do with anyone else's problems. And I noticed that my mind, freed from the constant low hum of other people's needs, was actually quite interesting to spend time inside. I had forgotten that about myself. Somewhere in the years of managing and accommodating and making myself responsible for everything, I had forgotten that I was a person worth spending time with. Not because of what I could provide, not because of what I could fix or fund or carry, just because of who I was sitting quietly in an empty room watching light move across water. When the truck finally arrived on the 12th, I was almost sorry to see the quiet end. Almost. The movers were efficient and cheerful and had everything placed by 4 in the afternoon. I tipped them generously and then stood in the middle of my fully furnished living room and turned slowly, taking inventory of my life, arranged in a new space. Robert's photograph was on the shelf now, a proper shelf where I'd put it the moment the bookcase went up. It looked right there. He looked like he belonged. "Welcome home," I told him, both of us. That evening, for the first time in the new house, I cooked a real dinner. Nothing elaborate pasta the way I like it, which is to say slightly overcooked with too much garlic and a glass of red wine beside the stove. I ate at my own table in my own kitchen in my own home, and the meal tasted like something I couldn't quite name. Not just food, something larger than food. Freedom, maybe, finally served warm. March arrived and brought with it the thing I had been quietly dreading without acknowledging it, the loneliness. Not the good kind I discovered in the first 2 days, the other kind. The kind that arrives not in silence but in the middle of ordinary moments, reaching for my phone to tell Robert something funny and remembering again that he was gone. Cooking too much and standing over the pot thinking, who is this for? Waking at 3 in the morning in a house that didn't know me yet, in a state full of strangers 68 years old and very far from everything familiar. I want to be honest about this because I think it matters. Because every story about a woman who finally chooses herself runs the risk of making it look too clean, too triumphant. As if the moment you make the right decision, the difficulty evaporates and only the reward remains. It doesn't work like that. The right decision can still cost you, can still hollow out certain hours of certain days, can leave you sitting at your kitchen table at 10 in the morning, wondering whether courage and loneliness are always going to be the same package. I called Dolores on one of those mornings. "Tell me it gets better," I said. She didn't hesitate. "It gets better, but first it gets realer." "What does that mean?" "It means you're actually living your life now, instead of living everyone else's. And living your own life means you feel all of it. The good parts and the hollow parts. You didn't feel the hollow parts before because you were too busy filling everyone else up." I was quiet. "Evelyn, how many years did you spend not having time to be lonely?" I thought about it. Most of them. "Right, so now you're catching up. That's not failure. That's just you're finally present enough for the full human experience." I laughed despite myself. "You make loneliness sound like an achievement. For you right now it is. It means you're actually there, in that house, in that life, not managing it from a distance." We talked for an hour. By the end I felt something I could work with. Not fixed, not cured, but capable. Armed with the understanding that some mornings were going to be harder than others, and that hard mornings were not signs that I had made a mistake. They were just mornings, and they always ended. I signed up for a watercolor class in early March. Not because I had any talent for it, I emphatically do not, but because I needed to be around people without the pressure of needing to be useful to them. The class met on Tuesday mornings in a studio above a coffee shop in town, and there were 7 of us, ranging from a retired engineer named Frank, who took the whole thing very seriously, to a woman named Bet, who seemed primarily interested in the social hour afterward and made no apologies about it. I liked both of them immediately. Bet it turned out had moved to Colorado 4 years earlier after her own life had done its version of what mine had done. Different details, same essential reckoning. We had coffee after the third class, and she talked for 20 minutes about her daughter, and I talked for 20 minutes about Daniel. And when we finally stopped, she looked at me with recognition so complete it almost felt like relief. "You know what I've figured out," she said. "The kids are always going to be okay. It's us we have to worry about. They're young, they adapt. We're the ones who spent 40 years learning how to do things one way and then had to figure out how to do them completely differently." "And did you?" I asked. "Figure it out?" She looked at me over her coffee cup with a smile that had a whole life in it. "Still working on it, but I'm having a great time trying." I went home that afternoon feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Something was beginning, not loudly, not dramatically, but the way real things begin quietly, steadily, with the particular solidity of something that is built rather than found. It was the second week of April when Daniel called me on a Sunday afternoon, and his voice carried something in it I hadn't heard in a long time, something young-sounding, uncertain in the way of people who are about to say something that matters and are not sure how it will land. "Mom, can I talk to you about something?" "Always." "I've been Rachel and I have been talking. About the will." I was quiet. "I know you changed it. I'm not asking you to change it back. I want to be clear about that. That's not what this is." "Okay, what is it?" He took a breath. "I want to know why, the real why. Not the legal version, not the practical version. I want to understand what it meant, to you, when you did it." I sat down. This was the question I had not expected him to ask. I had expected anger again, or negotiation, or the careful managed acceptance of someone who disagreed, but had decided not to fight it. I had not expected him to come back months later and ask for the truth of it. "It meant," I said slowly, "that I was done writing my future as a story that was entirely about you. It meant that I had spent years designing my life, even my death, around what you would need." And I realized sitting across from Patricia that morning that I had never once designed it around what I needed, what I wanted, what I deserved to leave behind as mine. Silence. "It wasn't punishment," I continued. "It was reclamation. Do you understand the difference?" "I think so." His voice was careful and real. "I think I'm starting to." "The will isn't closed, Daniel. I haven't cut you out of my life. What I've done is made sure that what I leave behind reflects who I am, not just who I was to you. Those are different things." Another silence. Longer this time. "Mom, I have to tell you something." "Tell me." "When I wrote the note, and I know I've said this before, but I need to say it more completely, I think I was trying to push you away because I couldn't figure out how to let you in on better terms. Does that make sense? Like I couldn't figure out how to say the way we're doing this isn't working, so I said the worst version of that instead. The version that put it all on you." "Yes," I said. "That makes sense. That was wrong." "Yes, it was. And I'm sorry. Not a quick sorry. The real kind. The kind where I actually understand what I did." I sat with that for a moment, held it, felt the weight of it, which was different from the weight of everything that had come before. Lighter, paradoxically. Lighter because it was clean, because it was honest, because it was finally the full thing and not a managed portion of it. "Thank you," I said. "That's the apology I needed." "Did you know you were waiting for it?" "No," I said, "but I do now." He exhaled. Something released in the sound of it, something that had been held for months. "Rachel wants to come visit," he said. "Next month, if that's okay." "It's more than okay. The guest room is ready. I bought it a new quilt." "She's going to love the quilt." "I know. I bought it for that reason." He laughed. "Mom, yes, I love you." "I love you too, Daniel. I love you exactly as much as I always have. None of that changed. What changed is that I love myself now too, at the same time, without choosing." He was quiet for a moment. He stopped. "I think that's the healthiest thing you've ever said to me." "Probably," I said. "I'm a late bloomer." Daniel and Rachel arrived on the 15th of May. I was at the door before their rental car had fully stopped in the driveway. Not because I'd been watching anxiously, or not only because of that. Mostly because I had been genuinely looking forward to this, to showing them the house, to standing in a place that was entirely mine and having them inside it as guests, as family, as people I loved who were visiting, rather than people I was accommodating at cost to myself. The difference sounds subtle. It is not subtle at all. Rachel got out of the car first. She looked different, lighter somehow. The tension I had learned to read in her shoulders over 7 years was not there in the same way. She was wearing her good coat again, the navy blue wool, and she looked at the house and then she looked at me, and her face did something open and unguarded. Evelyn. She crossed the distance between us and put her arms around me before I could move toward her. This place is beautiful. You haven't even been inside yet. I don't need to be. I can feel it from here. Daniel came around the car. He had a bottle of wine in one hand and the succulent Rachel's succulent, the one she'd apparently been keeping at their apartment until they could deliver it in person, in the other. He held it up when he saw me looking. "We kept it alive," he said with a pride so genuine it made me laugh out loud. "Come inside," I said. "Both of you, come in." I gave them the tour, the main room with the lake windows, the kitchen with the afternoon light, the guest room with the new quilt. Rachel ran her hand over it immediately and said, "Oh, this is beautiful," with a delight so uncomplicated it made my chest ache a little with something good. The shelf where Robert's photograph stood. Rachel looked at it for a moment and said nothing, just nodded slightly the way you nod at something that deserves acknowledgement. Daniel stood at the window for a long time. "Mom," he said finally, without turning around. "Yes, you did it." "I did." He turned. His eyes were bright. He pressed his mouth together for a second the way he does when something is more than he wants to show. "You actually did it." "Was there doubt?" "No, maybe. I don't know." He shook his head. "You look different here. You look like yourself, like the version of you I remember from when I was a kid, and you had everything running and you were just—" He stopped. "You were just Mom. Not worried. Just you." I had not expected that. I had not expected him to be able to see it so clearly or to name it so well. "Thank you," I said. "That's the best thing you could have told me." We ate dinner at my table that night. I cooked the pasta again because it had become something like a ritual. Now the meal that marked occasions in my new life, and Rachel brought bread from a bakery she'd found on the drive, and Daniel poured wine, and the three of us sat in the warmth of the kitchen, with the dark outside and the lake invisible beyond the window, and talked the way we hadn't talked in years. Not carefully, not managed, not with any portion of anyone's real feelings held back for safekeeping. We talked about their new apartment and the neighborhood they were learning. We talked about Daniel's job, which had offered him a leadership position he'd been considering. We talked about Rachel's sister's upcoming wedding and the logistics of it. We talked about small things and large things and everything in between, and I sat in the middle of it and felt the specific, irreplaceable texture of a family that had broken something important and then had the courage to build it back differently. Not the same. It would never be the same. Better. At one point, Rachel set down her wine glass and looked at me directly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you regret any of it? Not the moving? I mean the 7 years. Do you regret saying yes to the arrangement in the first place?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "I regret some of what happened inside it. I regret not naming things sooner. I regret letting it go on past the point where it was working." I paused. "But the original offer wanting to help you both when you were struggling, I don't regret that, because it came from love. What I've learned is that love without honesty eventually becomes something else, something that costs more than either person intended." Rachel nodded slowly. "Love without honesty," she repeated. "Yeah, I think that's what happened to us too, on our end. We loved being there and then we stopped being honest about what it was. And now we're honest." She looked at Daniel, then back at me. "We're better for it, genuinely." Daniel reached over and put his hand on her shoulder briefly. She leaned into it, and I sat across from them and thought they're going to be okay, not because I'll be there to catch them, because they're learning to catch each other, and that is exactly how it was always supposed to work. After dinner, after the dishes, after Rachel went to the guest room to unpack, Daniel and I sat together at the kitchen table with the last of the wine and the particular quiet that falls when the day has said most of what it needed to say. He was looking at the table, turning his glass by the stem. I knew that posture. It meant something was still circling, looking for a way down. "Say it," I said. He looked up. "The will. Are you going to... He stopped, started again. I don't need to know what's in it. I don't think I should know, but I want to ask you something about it. Ask. Did changing it feel like letting go of me when you did it? I thought about Patricia's office, the documents on the desk, the feeling that had arrived as I signed them. No, I said. It felt like letting go of a version of myself, the version who had organized her entire existence, even the end of it, around being needed. The will wasn't about you. It was about me finally taking up the full space of my own life. I paused. You were never not my son. That was never in question. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. Okay. Yeah. He nodded. Once. Solid. Okay. We sat a little longer. Then he said, I've been thinking about what you said on the phone, about loving yourself at the same time, without choosing. Yes. I don't think I've ever done that. Not really. He looked at the table. I think I've spent most of my life either taking care of Rachel or letting you take care of me. I've never actually sat with just myself and figured out what I want, independent of anyone else. I looked at my son. 43 years old, good man, still growing. They always are if you're lucky. That's your work now, I said. Not mine to do for you, but yours. And you're capable of it, Daniel. I have always known you were capable of more than you were asked to be. He absorbed that. That's either a compliment or an indictment, he said. It's both, I said, like most honest things. He smiled, and it was the smile I remembered from before everything got complicated, the real one, undefended, the one that looked like Robert, and like himself at the same time. We said goodnight shortly after. He hugged me at the kitchen door, a real hug, the kind with weight behind it, not the careful, brief contact of someone maintaining a polite distance. I held on for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then I let go. Sleep well, I said. You too, Mom. I stood in the kitchen after they'd gone to the guest room. I washed the wine glasses and dried them and put them back in the cabinet. I turned off the kitchen light. I walked through my living room in the dark, past Robert's photograph on the shelf, past the window where the lake lay invisible under the night. I stopped at my desk. I opened the drawer. The list was still there, folded, held, patient as paper always is. I took it out and unfolded it one more time. I want mornings that belong to me. I want a home where nothing moves without my permission. I want to go somewhere new. I want to sit somewhere beautiful and feel nothing but the beauty of it. I want to figure out who I am when I'm not taking care of someone. I want time. Just time. Mine. And the last one, I want to forgive my son. Not because he deserves it yet, but because I deserve to put the weight down. I read through it slowly. Every line. And I realized, standing in the dark of my kitchen, in my house in Colorado, at 11 o'clock on a May night with my son, asleep down the hall, that I had done every single thing on the list. Everyone. I had gotten the mornings. I had gotten the home. I had gotten the new place with no history attached. I had sat beside a frozen lake and felt nothing but the beauty of it. I had spent 3 months learning who I was when I wasn't taking care of someone, and the answer had turned out to be a person worth knowing. And I had forgiven my son, not all at once, not in a single dramatic moment of grace, but the way real forgiveness happens over months of honest conversations and held silences and small choices. Until one day you realize the weight you said you were going to put down is simply not in your hands anymore. It was done. I folded the list one last time. I did not put it back in the drawer. I walked to the kitchen, and I held it over the sink, and I let it go. Not because it no longer mattered, because it was finished, and finished things deserve to be released. I want to tell you something before this story ends. I want to tell you something not as Evelyn Harper, whose son left a note and whose life rearranged itself in the months that followed, but as a woman who has lived 68 years and learned this particular truth the hard way, at a cost she would not have chosen, but cannot bring herself to regret. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to have a future that is not designed around someone else's needs. You are allowed to say, at whatever age you are reading this or hearing this, that the life you have been living in the margins is not the life you are required to keep living. You are allowed to take the note someone left you, the note that felt like dismissal, and hear in it, however accidentally, however painfully, an invitation. An invitation to stop building your world around people who have stopped building theirs around you. an invitation to find out what you want, what you need, what you are when you remove the word caretaker and the word sacrifice and the word obligation from the sentence and just let yourself be a person. I was 68 when I found that invitation. Some of you are younger, some are older. The age doesn't matter as much as the decision. Because here is what I know now, standing in my house by the lake in Colorado, with my son's family visiting down the hall, and a watercolor class on Tuesday, and a friend named Bet, who drinks too much coffee and makes me laugh without trying, and Robert's photograph on the shelf watching all of it, with what I choose to imagine is approval. I know that the best thing my son ever did for me was leave that note. Not because the words were kind, they weren't. Not because the timing was good, it wasn't. But because sometimes the people we love most, even when they are being their worst selves, crack something open that we have spent years keeping closed. And through that crack, if we are brave enough and clear-eyed enough and just desperate enough to look, light comes in. The kind of light that changes everything. The kind that shows you the room you've been living in as it actually is not as you've been pretending it is. The kind that makes it impossible to go back to the dark. My son told me to stop depending on him. And I stopped depending on anyone but myself. And the morning I did the first morning, I woke up in my own house in a place I'd never been before, with the lake outside and the quiet around me, and nothing required of me but to simply be alive and present and entirely, completely my own. That morning was the first morning of the rest of my life, and I have not wasted a single one.